This week's Bible reading puts us immediately in a world that is very different from our own, not only in social terms or technological terms, but in religious practice and in concepts of what is worship. It's a world in which sacrifice is considered the act of worship. And when we look back at it from our perspective, we see something like that and we think, oh, how primitive. But in fact, there's a lot more going on there than the way that it's normally looked at, which is that somebody wants something from a god or God and takes an animal and has it ritually slaughtered and burned, and that somehow the act of gift pleases God, and it acts sort of as a payment for a favor. And I don't doubt that there were some times when people did think of sacrifice that way, just as even now, people will sometimes pray, Lord, if you do this for me, I will do that for you. And that is not really how things work. And I don't think that back in ancient times, people saw that sacrifice as simplistically as we look at it when we stare across the ages. It was a signal that somebody was taking a risk on the constancy and the relationship that was established between them and the deity. They were taking something that was a part of their future. You depend on your livestock for your future. And you take something that is actually worth something to you and you present it. It's an act that says, I'm putting my future in your hands. And the ultimate sacrifice in such an understanding would be to take one of your children and replace the animal with the child. Human sacrifice was known all over the world thousands of years ago. In the ancient Near East, there were some deities that were worshipped, especially in that way, and especially in times of great need. The idol Moloch was one that was worshipped by the Canaanites and by their descendants, the Carthaginians in North Africa, and was always portrayed as having hands out, and the hands would accept a baby that would roll from the hands into the idol's stomach where there would be a fire. And that has been archaeologically demonstrated many times. When the later prophets spoke about the horrors of idol worship, these were the sort of things that they were protesting. The God of Israel was not one that would accept that kind of behavior toward another human being, especially toward a child. And yet, in this story that we're going to hear, well, let me read it to you, and then we'll go back and look at it in the form of a sermon and what God's response to such things really was and is. This is found in Genesis 22, 1 through 14. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father? And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, The fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. And the two of them walked on together. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Let me just say from the outset, this is for me, as I think for most people that will be watching this, if you've made it this far, a very troubling passage. The idea that someone would kill their child and say, oh, it was because God wanted this, it would be judged by me, and again, I think by most people in the modern world, uh, as an act, the best we could say, it might be criminal insanity, but probably something just even worse than that. In her book, A History of God, Karen Armstrong writes, To modern ears, this is a horrible story. It depicts God as a despotic and capricious sadist, and it is not surprising that many people today who have heard this tale as children reject such a deity. Before a total rejection, though, look at this passage more closely and do the same when you come across other parts of the Bible that raise similar questions, like Joshua, for instance, or the book of Judges, where there, in both books, are people leading armies that commit massacres and try to wipe people out across the entire land and say that it's by divine command. Our question, is that really who God is? Is that really what God would want his people to do? Is valid. And this passage actually addresses that. It tells us not just about events, but I believe it tells us something about who we are, about our sinfulness, and what God does about that. And I believe that what it also says is that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. But to actually begin doing that and reach that point, which I hope you do, first off, we have to realize that we're not so different. Maybe not realize, maybe I should say admit that we're not so different from the people that we're quick to condemn. Instead of going back thousands of years, just go back three. Look at the October 7th massacres, where Palestinian insurgents from Hamas killed hundreds of civilians, men, women, and children, not all of them even Israelis. And look at how the Israelis retaliated against thousands of Palestinians, men, women, and children, and not all of them even Palestinians, and reduced their towns to rubble and left the people dying in terrible ways. What justifications are offered by either side or by both sides? There is plenty of harm, there is plenty of hurt, there is plenty of outright murder on both sides. And all of them doing it as they equate retribution with justice. And as much as I can, especially from a distance, on this side of the Atlantic, condemn everybody's actions. If I'm totally honest, I will admit that I understand in my gut where their decisions and their actions, the ones that I disapprove, still come from. That itself troubles me. All of this barbarity, all of this violence, all of this anger, all of this terrible stuff is part of human life. They're part of our own fallen human nature. We can look to all sorts of examples where horrible things are done and God's name is invoked implicitly, even if it's not always spoken outright. Are we not all ready to do and say things that sentence the next generation to all sorts of trouble, even to death, for our own benefit? Take climate change, for an example. Oh, it'll be a problem very soon. But don't worry, we'll be dead by then. That's a lot of people's attitude. All right, before I go off, way off on a soapbox, back to this passage. The story in Genesis is not only about our willingness to sacrifice the future, but it's about God's intervention when we do that in the wrong ways. when it's not putting the future in God's hands, but cutting the future off. We're told that this episode in Abraham's life wasn't something that he initiated, but something that God did, and not randomly, but because God tested Abraham. And the account is the account of the test. But let's ask what the test was actually about. I had, when I was in high school, an American Studies teacher who gave the class a quiz about the Great Depression. I remember this vividly. And when we got it back, on the test to begin with, it had the question, true or false? Franklin Roosevelt asked Congress to repeal the law of supply and demand. Uh, I remember looking at that thing and just kind of chuckling because this teacher had a very, very, uh, let's say, idiosyncratic sense of humor. Uh, it was one of his little jokes to toss that in. And when we got our papers back, we realized that not everybody got the joke because there was somebody in the class who raised her hand and said that she was unhappy because she couldn't find anything about that in her lecture notes. She couldn't find any mention of the law of supply and demand there or in the textbook. And then the teacher said, well, can you tell me what the law of supply and demand is? She said, no, I just told you that. And he asked her, then why didn't you ask about it when you saw the question? That's the real lesson here. And then he moved on. And it was the real lesson. If the command to sacrifice Isaac was a test, what was it really testing? Certainly, as tradition says, it was a test of Abraham's obedience, and he passed that with a high mark of approval. But beyond that was another lesson, which was that God did not allow him to follow through and finish the test by plunging the knife into Isaac. Genesis says, he said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you've not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So maybe we are being tested too. When we hear about this whole event, being tested in how we react and the thoughts that come up in our minds and the feelings that come up in our hearts. Yes, we want to know what kind of God would want to see Isaac killed. And the answer, if you look at how it all turned out, is not the God that Abraham worshiped. We, like him, are also tested and tried by extreme motives that may seem to come from beyond us, but that are connected to the motives that drive us. Do not assume that those are always the will of God. Even when we're absolutely sure that we're justified about something, God may step in and say, enough, stop right there. Part of the test that Abraham faced, a test that we all face more often than we like to admit, is to obey that second voice, that second speech, the one that says, put the knife down. The real God is the one who says to drop our angry claims to righteous wrath, to stop justifying things that both attract and repulse us at the same moment, to back off instead, and to take it one step further, even to offer mercy. Mercy is the real sacrifice that's asked of us. Honestly, it can be much more costly to give up resentment and bitterness and hatred than to offer any material gift. And that act of obedience, of giving it up, of handing it over, of forgiving, that is the worship that's welcomed, the worship that touches God's heart. Again, we have the advantage in that we have heard the promise that blessed are the merciful, for they will obtain mercy. And those are the words of the one and only person who ever had no need to justify himself, because he was the one and only person who has gone through this world without sin. And in fact, the one and only person who could and did take on all that the world could aim at anyone, and came through it, not on his own account, but on ours. That's the ultimate sacrifice. And it's why we call Jesus the Lamb of God, the one who takes away the sins of the world. That ram caught in the thicket took Isaac's place, but Jesus takes everybody's place. And by everybody, that includes us and it includes our enemies. And that makes him exactly the one and only one worthy of worship and gratitude and emulation. It's why later writers would speak of him as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, and why you'll see the Lamb at the very peak of the front window in our sanctuary. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon the throne. Hark, how the heavenly anthem drowns all music but its own. All hail, Redeemer, hail, for thou hast died for me. Thy praise and glory shall not fail through all eternity.